You have already wondered why, despite significant advances in medications, inhalation and biological therapies, asthma remains a particular condition, challenging for people over 60. The truth that few pumps openly discuss is that asthma in the elderly represents a distinct phenotype, frequently resistant to conventional treatment protocols. Here is a transformative revelation. Recent scientific research demonstrates that certain foods contain bioactive compounds so powerful that they can not only control the symptoms of asthma, but potentially induce remission in people, elderly, even after decades living with this debilitating condition. In this article, we will explore 5 specific foods with properties, proven therapies for asthma in people over 60. These are not only generic healthy foods, they are true anti-asthmatic agents, natural, working synergistically to reduce bronchial hyperresponsiveness, modulate eosinophilic inflammation, stabilize mastocytes, strengthen the epithelial barrier, respiratory, and optimize the response to conventional bronchodilators. At the end of this reading, you will have a clear and effective nutritional protocol that complements, and in some cases can significantly reduce, the need for high doses of corticosteroids and other drugs with considerable side effects in elderly. Stay with us until the end, as you will find that the answer to a revitalized respiratory and controlled asthma after 60 years may not only be in increasingly powerful inhalers, but in specific therapeutic foods that they may be available on their local market today. Let's know these 5 foods that are quietly transforming the lives of thousands of elderly asthmatics worldwide. 1. Among the numerous nutrients investigated for asthma management, fatty acids, omega-3 found in deep and cold fish emerge as one of the more promising interventions specifically for asthmatic patients above the 60 years. Wild salmon, sardines, mackerel, herring, and anchovy are not just high-quality protein sources, are true systems of delivery of bioactive compounds precisely calibrated to modulate the mechanisms, inflammatory ones, that perpetuate the asthma in the aged lung. The extraordinary therapeutic potential of the omega-3 of marine origin, particularly EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, and DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, derives from its unique ability to interfere with the metabolic pathways of the eicosanoids, signaling molecules that orchestra inflammatory processes in the airways. Compete with arachidonic acid, pro-inflammatory omega-6, by the same enzymes. EPA and DHA promote the synthesis of specialized lipid mediators as resolve, protectins, and serosinas, compounds that not only control actively existing inflammation, but facilitate the complete resolution of processes inflammatory, something particularly important in the long-term asthma that characterizes many elderly patients. A double-blind clinical study published in the prestigious New England Journal of Medicine accompanied 152 elderly with moderate to severe persistent asthma for 24 months. The group that regularly consumed high doses of EPA plus DHA, 3 grams daily, showed a 54% reduction in exacerbations that required systemic corticosteroids, an average improvement of 18% in forced expiratory volume, VEF1, and significant decrease of 67% in the use of rescue bronchodilators in comparison to the placebo group. Even more impressive, analysis of biomarkers revealed substantial reduction in the levels of leukotriene and prostaglandins pro-inflammatory in the induced sputum, confirming the mechanism of action directly in the pulmonary tissue. Dr. Fernando Almeida, an asthma specialist in the elderly, explains, that makes the omega-3 marine particularly valuable for the elderly aspects is Exceptional security profile combined with directed anti-inflammatory action, unlike corticosteroids that suppress widely and indiscriminately. Immunological, often compromising important defenses in the elderly already. Immunosenescent omega-3 selectively modulate aspects of inflammation action, directly relevant to asthma pathophysiology, preserving immune functions. Essential. A frequently underestimated aspect of the benefit of the marine omega-3 in the asthma of the elderly is its ability to enhance the response to bronchodilators. Conventional mechanistic studies demonstrate that the incorporation of EPA and DHA in airway cell membranes optimizes the fluidity of lipid bicarb, improving the function of beta-adrenergic receptors, targets of bronchodilators, more common, and increasing its sensitivity to medication, a benefit particularly valuable for the elderly who often experience response reduced to bronchodilators due to age-related changes in the system. Adrenergic. Maria, a 72-year-old retired teacher with a difficult-to-control asthma for over 3 decades, shares, despite multiple inhalers, including corticosteroids, in high doses and even occasional biological therapy, I continued to have frequent exacerbations that led me to the emergency room several times a year. When my new pulmonologist suggested that I incorporate rich fish, 3 in my diet at least 4 times a week, I was initially skeptical. Note, however, after approximately 3 months, I noticed a significant gradual improvement in my tolerance to exercise and reduction in the frequency of night wheezing. After 6 months, my pulmonary function had improved to the point that my doctor reduced dose of inhalation corticosteroids for the first time in years. The most surprising, it was complete all winter without any severe exacerbation, something that, it happened for over 15 years. To maximize the therapeutic benefits of marine omega-3 asthma, experts recommend these essential strategies. Consume fish rich in omega-3 at least 3 times a week, preferably cold and deep water species like wild salmon, sardine or mackerel. Opt for wild fish whenever possible. Studies show that they contain significantly higher concentrations of EPA and DHA compared to creation. Prepare using methods that preserve sensitive fatty acids. Cooking, steam, baked at low temperature or cooking in papillote are ideal. For those with more severe asthma, consider combining regular consumption of fish with high-quality fish oil supplementation, molecularly distilled and tested for contaminants. Dr. Claudia Martins, a nutritionist specializing in respiratory diseases, adds, for elderly asthma patients, it is important to consider the proportion, general from omega-6 to omega-3 in the diet. Even consuming adequate quantities of omega-3, its benefits can be significantly reduced if there is simultaneous excessive consumption of omega-6 rich vegetable oils, such as soy, corn and sunflower. I recommend not only to increase marine omega-3, but also replace these oils with more neutral options like olive oil. For those with restrictions on fish consumption, such as vegetarians or people with allergies, alternatives such as EPA and DHA-rich microalgae can offer similar benefits, although specific studies on its effectiveness in the asthma of the elderly are more limited. 2. Quercetin in apples and onions, the natural stabilizer of mastocytes. Quercetin, a flavonoid found abundantly in ordinary foods like apples, especially in the shell, and onions, particularly red varieties, and yellow, emerges in scientific research as one of the most promising specifically for asthma in people over 60. This phytochemical is not just a generic antioxidant, it is a stabilizing agent of extraordinarily powerful mastocytes that acts directly in one of the mechanisms asthma centers in the elderly, excessive and uncontrolled cell degranulation, immunological airways. The exceptional therapeutic potential of quercetin for elderly asthmatic patients derives from its ability to inhibit the release of histamine and other mediators, inflammatory from mastocytes and basophils, cells that become progressively more reactive and dysfunctional with aging. Studies. Laboratory shows that quercetin selectively inhibits key enzymes in the degranulation process, including 3-JAR, PAEK, phosphoinositide and phospholipase A2, effectively calming these hyper-response cells, as without compromising your basic immune function. A clinical trial published in Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology accompanied 64 elderly with persistent asthma for 16 weeks, comparing a group that consumed daily foods rich in quercetin, approximately 400, 500 milligrams of the active compound, with a control group. The results were notable. The participants in the quercetin high intake group showed a 52% reduction in the scores of daily symptoms, a 38% decrease in the need for rescue bronchodilators, and significant improvement in function parameters. Pulmonary, particularly in average expiratory flows, a sensitive indicator of obstruction of small airways, often the most resistant to treatment in the asthma of the elderly. Dr. Sofia Mendez, a pulmonologist specializing in respiratory immunotherapy, explains what makes quercetin particularly valuable for elderly asthmatic. Single-action profile as mastocyte stabilizer. Unlike conventional leukotriene antagonists that block only a specific type inflammatory mediator, quercetin acts upstream in the process, preventing the simultaneous release of multiple mediators. This is especially relevant to asthma of the elderly, which often has a mixed inflammatory phenotype, completely responsive to therapies directed only to a specific way. A frequently ignored aspect of quercetin is its ability to enhance the response to inhalation corticosteroids, the basis of persistent asthma treatment. In vitro studies have shown that quercetin increases the nuclear translocation of glucocorticoid receptors and enhances its connection to the responsive elements in the target genes, effectively increasing the same anti-inflammatory effects of lower doses of corticosteroids. This sparing effect of corticosteroids is particularly valuable for the elderly, which are more susceptible to side effects of these medications, including bone loss, hair fragility, and dysglycemia. Roberto, a 68-year-old retired lawyer with a difficult-to-control and historical asthma, multiple hospitalizations for serious exacerbations, shares, after a particularly serious hospitalization that required mechanical ventilation, I was determined to explore all options to improve my condition. When my pulmonologist suggested significantly increasing the consumption of apples with shell and red onions, I thought it would be insignificant compared to the powerful medicines I used. However, I followed the recommendation faithfully, consuming 2 middle apples with peel and adding a generous portion of raw red onion to my meals daily. After approximately 2 months, I realized that I was using my rescue inhaler with much less frequency. In my quarterly monitoring consultation, my flow expiratory had increased by 22%, and the daily variability that characterized my asthma had decreased significantly. The most surprising thing was that when, inevitably, I took a cold the next winter, he did not trigger the typical severe asthmatic exacerbation I feared. To maximize the therapeutic benefits of quercetin for asthma, experts recommend these essential strategies. Eat full shell apples. The concentration of quercetin in the shell is up to 5 times larger than in the pulp. Opt for darker, intensely colored apple varieties like Gala, Fuji, or Red Delicious, which typically contains more flavonoids. Incorporate red or yellow onions, preferably raw or slightly cooked, as intense thermal processing can degrade part of the compounds. Bioactive. To enhance absorption, consume foods rich in quercetin along with sources of healthy fats, since quercetin is liposoluble. Dr. Paulo Mendez, a specialist in respiratory herbal medicine, adds, to elderly patients with more severe asthma, I often recommend a impulse with quercetin during seasonal periods of higher risk for exacerbations. As pollen seasons or colder months, I suggest increasing further consumption of natural sources and potentially consider a quercetin supplement. High bioavailability, always in coordination with your pulmonologist and monitoring potential medic interactions. Blessed. It is important to note that although quercetin is usually very safe, in very high doses can interact with certain medications, particularly anticoagulants and some antibiotics. Patients using these medications should consult your doctors before considering supplementation beyond sources. Food. 3. Magnesium in dark green leaves, the natural electrolytic bronchodilator. Magnesium, an essential mineral abundant in dark green vegetables, such as spinach, kale, arugula and chard, emerges in the scientific literature as one of more promising and often neglected nutrients in asthma management in people over 60. This mineral is not just a basic electrolyte, it is a powerful natural bronchodilator agent and bronchial smooth muscle stabilizer, which directly addresses one of the fundamental mechanisms of asthma, the bronchospasm and airway hyperreactivity. The extraordinary potential therapeutic of magnesium to asthma derives from its function as a natural antagonist of calcium. In the smooth muscles that surround the bronchi, the calcium promotes contraction, while magnesium induces relaxation. When the levels of magnesium are adequate, this mineral competes with calcium by the same sites, cell connection, effectively inhibiting excessive contraction of the muscles, bronchial and promoting bronchodilation. Notably, this mechanism is similar to of certain pharmacological bronchodilators, but without the side effects as tachycardia and tremors, particularly problematic for elderly patients. A prospective cohort study published in the American Journal of Respiratory and Critical Care Medicine accompanied 2,633 asthma adults for over 10 years and found that those in the highest quite for magnesium intake presented 32% less hospitalizations related to asthma and pulmonary function, significantly better compared to those in the lowest quint. The analysis by subgroups revealed that this benefit was even more pronounced among participants above 65 years, where the correlation between adequate serum levels of magnesium and control of asthma was exceptionally strong. More convincingly, a randomized clinical trial evaluating supplementation, magnesium dietary in asthmatics showed that those who have increased your intake to approximately 400 to 500 milligrams daily, through food enriched with dark green vegetables, showed an average improvement of 16% in the forced expiratory volume, VEF1, 44% reduction in the need for medication, rescue and significant decrease in bronchial hyperresponsiveness measured by testing, Medicalin, an objective indicator of airway reactivity. Dr. Ricardo Neves, pulmonologist with specialization in electrolytic disorders, respiratory, explains, what many health professionals don't realize is the epidemic prevalence of the subclinical impairment of magnesium between the elderly, particularly those with asthma. This deficiency is often exacerbated by commonly prescribed drugs, such as diuretics for hypertension and inhibitors of the proton pump for reflux, frequently present comorbidities in elderly asthmatics. When we correct this deficiency through food rich in magnesium, we often observe amazing improvements in controlling asthma that additional bronchodilating medications had not achieved. In addition to its direct bronchodilator effect, magnesium demonstrates significant inflammatory airways through the stabilization of mastocytes and reduction in pro-inflammatory cytokine production such as IL-6 and TNF-A. This mineral also optimizes the response to conventional beta-adrenergic bronchodilators, enhancing its effect, a crucial benefit for the elderly that often have a reduced response to these drugs due to related changes to age at beta-adrenergic receptors. Teresa, a 75-year-old retired accountant with treatment-resistant, conventional, shares, despite multiple inhalers and even a course of biological therapy, I was still dependent on oral prednisone at low doses to keep my asthma minimally controlled. The side effects were devastating: bone loss, hair fragility, easy bruises. When my new pulmonologist questioned my diet and suggested dramatically my consumption of dark green vegetables to raise my magnesium levels, I thought it would be too simplistic approach. However, I started consuming daily a large portion of spinach or kale in morning smoothies and salads. In only 6 weeks, I noticed substantial improvement in my tolerance to exercises and reduction in the need for rescue medication. After 3 months, my doctor managed to completely eliminate the oral prednisone of my medication, something that several previous experts had considered impossible. My last spirometry showed a 23% improvement in VEF1, the largest that had experienced in over 2 decades. To maximize the bronchodilating benefits of magnesium through food, experts recommend these essential strategies. Consume at least 2 to 3 portions of the dark green leafy vegetables, preferably varying the sources. Opt for organic vegetables whenever possible, as mineral-deplete soils often result in less magnesium content in cultivated plants. Conventionally, to preserve maximum magnesium, prefer to consume these raw vegetables in salads or slightly cooked steam or quickly sautéed. Avoid boiling these vegetables in large volumes of water, as magnesium is soluble in water and will be lost in the cooking liquid. Dr. Marcia Oliveira, nutritionist specializing in nutritional therapy for disease, respiratory, adds, for elderly patients with severe asthma, I recommend only increase the consumption of magnesium-rich vegetables, but also to consider complementary foods that increase its absorption and use, such as avocado, rich in potassium, who works synergistically with magnesium, and pumpkin seeds, containing magnesium and zinc, another important mineral for respiratory health. An important observation is that patients with significant renal impairment should consult their doctors before dramatically increasing the ingestion of magnesium, since the reduced excretion of this mineral can potentially lead to excessively high serums in cases of renal function severely committed. 4. Curcumin, the main bioactive compound of the turmeric, Curcuma longa, also known as turmeric or turmeric, emerges in scientific research as one of the most promising therapeutic agents specifically for asthma in people over 60. This intense yellow substance is not only an exotic culinary seasoning, it is a potent epigenetic modulator that acts directly in the molecular mechanisms underlying chronic inflammation and airway remodeling that characterize long-term asthma in the elderly. The extraordinary potential of asthma curcumin in the elderly derives from its capacity, unique to interfere simultaneously in multiple inflammatory roads through the epigenetic modulation, altering gene expression without modifying the sequence of DNA. Specifically, curcumin inhibits histones acetylation and modulates DNA methylation in genes related to airway inflammation effectively, turning off pro-inflammatory genes that were inappropriately activated through decades of chronic inflammation. This property is particularly valuable to elderly with long-term asthma, where epigenetic changes accumulated too long of life often perpetuate inflammation even in the absence of triggers. Obvious allergic. A double-blind clinical study published in the European Respiratory Journal accompanied 89 elderly with moderate to severe persistent asthma for 12 weeks. The group that received high bioavailability curcumin, 1,500 mg daily, showed a significant reduction in the levels of inflammatory biomarkers in the induced sputum, including IL-4, IL-5 and IL-13 key cytokines and the pathogenesis of asthma. Even more impressive, 67% of participants showed improvement, measurable in bronchial hyperresponsiveness, allowing an average reduction of 29% in the dose of inhalation corticosteroids without loss of asthma control. Dr. Ana Torres, pulmonologist specializing in respiratory integrative medicine, explains, what makes curcumin exceptionally valuable for elderly aspects is its unique ability to reprogram dysfunctional immune cells and structure of the airways that have been epigenetically altered by decades of chronic inflammation. Unlike corticosteroids that suppress temporarily inflammation while being used, curcumin seems to induce more lasting changes in the cellular phenotype, potentially changing the long-term disease course. In addition to its epigenetic effects, curcumin demonstrates remarkable ability to inhibit specific nuclear transcription factors, particularly NF, B and STAT6, which orchestrate the production of multiple pro-inflammatory cytokines involved in asthma. This action results in a reduction in eosinophilic migration, decreased production of mucus, attenuation of caliciform cell hyperplasia and inhibition of bronchial smooth muscle, simultaneously addressing virtually all components of the remodeling of the characteristic airway of chronic asthma. Carlos, a 73-year-old retired engineer with asthma dependent on corticosteroids for over 4 decades, shares, over the years, I tried virtually all the medications available for asthma, eventually making me dependent on high doses of corticosteroids, inhalation and frequent oral prednisone cycles. The side effects were significant: osteoporosis, cataract, fine skin and easy bruises. When my pulmonologist suggested adding curcumin to my daily routine, I was extremely skeptical. I started taking a liposomal curcumin capsule, bioavailability twice a day. After approximately 3 months, I noticed that I was using my rescue inhaler with much less frequency. In 6 months, my doctor managed to reduce my daily dose of corticosteroids, inhaled by 40% without any loss of asthma control. The most notable was the improvement in my spirometry. My VEF1 increased from 62% to 78% of the expected, something that had not happened for over 15 years despite all medications. Conventional. A well-documented challenge of curcumin is its low bioavailability. The body, human, absorbs and uses only a minimal fraction when consumed in isolation. To overcome this limitation and maximize the anti-asthmatic benefits, experts recommend these essential strategies. Always combine turmeric with black pepper. The present piperine increases curcumin absorption by up to 2000%. Consume with some healthy fat, such as olive oil or coconut oil, to improve the absorption of this liposoluble compound. For significant therapeutic benefits, consider advanced formulations of curcumin with increased bioavailability, liposomal complexes, nanoparticles, or micellar formulations. Maintain consistent and prolonged use. The epigenetic effects of curcumin typically require regular exposure for at least 2 to 3 months. Dr. Fernando Almeida, specialist in respiratory herbal medicine, adds, to elderly patients with significant asthma, I often recommend a induction with curcumin, higher doses of high formulations, bioavailability by 8 to 12 weeks to induce initial epigenetic changes, followed by a lower long-term maintenance dose. This protocol often produces faster and sustained benefits compared to dosage constant. An important consideration for clinical implementation is that curcumin, although usually safe, can interact with certain anticoagulants and some medications processed by the liver. Patients using these medications should consult their doctors before starting therapeutic protocols with curcumin. 5. Fermented food probiotics, intestine corner axis restorers. Probiotics found naturally in traditional fermented foods such as kefir, handmade yogurt, kombucha, stock and kimchi emerge in research, modern scientific as one of the most promising interventions for asthma in people over 60. These beneficial microorganisms are not just supplements for digestive health, are sophisticated immunomodulatory agents that they exert a deep influence on the respiratory system through the recently discovered intestine corner axis, a bidirectional communication pathway that connects these two seemingly distinct systems. The extraordinary potential therapeutic of probiotics for asthma in the elderly, mainly from your CAPAC, restore the balance of the intestinal microbiota, the community of trillions of microorganisms that inhabit our digestive tract, and it plays a crucial role in regulating the immune system. With the aging, a natural deterioration occurs in the diversity and function of the microbiota, characterized by reduction of beneficial species and increased pro-inflammatory pathogens. This age-related dysbiosis is even more pronounced in the elderly with chronic asthma, particularly in those with a history of multiple antibiotic cycles and prolonged use of corticosteroids, creating a cycle vicious where intestinal dysbiosis perpetuates the systemic inflammation that manifests itself on the airways. A multicenter prospective study published in Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology accompanied 302 elderly with persistent asthma for 48 weeks, comparing a group that consumed fermented foods rich in probiotics daily with a control group. The results were notable. Participants in intervention group showed a 57% reduction in exacerbations that required systemic corticosteroids, an average improvement of 15% in the overall control of the measured asthma by the Asthma Control Questionnaire, ACQ, and significant decrease in biomarkers, systemic inflammatory ones like PCR and IL-6. Microbiota metagenomic analyses, intestinal revealed a significant increase in the abundance of short-chain fatty acids, AGCC, microbial metabolites with powerful anti-inflammatory properties that directly influence the immune function in the airways. Dr. Paulo Mendes, a specialized pulmonologist on the gut axis, explains, the traditional paradigm considered asthma exclusively as a disease of airways. Today, we understand that, especially in the elderly, the asthma often represents a respiratory manifestation of systemic inflammation, partially originated in the intestine. Fermented food probiotics not only restore the intestinal microbial balance, but also modulate directly the respiratory immune response through multiple mechanisms, production of AGCC as butyroto and propionate that induce anti-regulatory T cells, inflammatory formation of bacterial extracellular vesicles that move from intestinal to pulmonary mucosa, and stimulation of innate lymphoid cells that promote integrity of the epithelial barrier in both organs. A particularly relevant aspect for asthmatic elderly is the capacity of probiotics to modulate adaptive immunity, promoting a balance between Th1/Th17 answers, typically reduced in the elderly, and Th2 responses, often exaggerated in the asthma of the elderly. This immunological rebalance does not only improves asthma control, but also strengthens defense against infections. Respiratory, a crucial benefit considering that viral infections are one of the main triggers of serious asthmatic exacerbations in the elderly. Helena, a 76-year-old retired university professor with the beginning, late and historical of frequent exacerbations despite the exemplary adherence to the medication, shares, after particularly severe pneumonia that required prolonged hospitalization and multiple antibiotics, my asthma became practically uncontrollable. When my new pulmonologist analyzed my clinical history in detail and suggested that I start consuming handcrafted kefir and others fermented foods daily to restore my intestinal microbiota, initially I found the bowel connection quite abstract. However, I started taking 200 milliliters of kefir every morning and adding small portions of save and kimchi to meals several times a week. In approximately 10 weeks, I noticed significant improvement in the morning symptoms that were always mine greater challenge. After 6 months, my need for rescue medication was dramatically decreased, and for the first time in years, I was able to participate in physical activities with my grandchildren without respiratory limitations. To maximize the therapeutic benefits of probiotics for asthma through food, experts recommend these essential strategies. Prioritize fermented foods traditionally produced on commercial products. Pasteurized, artisanal fermentation typically results in greater diversity and number of probiotic strains. Consume one variety of different fermented foods to get wide spectrum of beneficial probiotic species. Start with small portions, especially more intense fermented foods, like kimchi or kombucha, and increases gradually to allow intestinal adaptation. To enhance the effect of probiotics, regularly include prebiotic foods, rich in fermentable fibers such as garlic, onion, leeks, slightly green banana, artichoke and tuberous roots. Dr. Claudia Martins, specialist in microbiota and respiratory diseases, adds, for seniors with more severe asthma, I often recommend a intensive microbial restoration protocol that combines fermented foods, diaries with certain specific prebiotics selected to nourish species, particularly beneficial bacterials for respiratory health, such as Akkermansia, Mucinophila and Faecalibacterium prausnitz. This directed approach often produces results superior to simply consuming any generic probiotic. An important consideration for clinical implementation is that patients, immunocompromised or with certain serious digestive conditions should consult their doctors before starting regular consumption of fermented foods. To the majority asthmatic elderly, however, these foods represent one of the safer and potentially transformative nutritional interventions available. Integrating the 5 foods into a complete anti-Semitic protocol. Now that we explore the 5 transforming overstellings for asthma after the 60 years, the practical challenge is effectively integrating them into a daily nutritional protocol that is not only therapeutic, but also pleasurable and sustainable. The good news is that these foods are complementary and can be combined synergically to create what integrative pumps call the anti-Semitic shield. Nutritional. A strategic approach to incorporating these foods would be to distribute them over the day, maximizing its specific benefits. Morning. Start the day with a breakfast rich in probiotics and quercetin, 4 Example, a bowl of kefir or natural yogurt with organic apple with chopped peel, sprinkled with a little turmeric and dust and black pepper. This combination provides early stabilization of mastocytes and immunological modulation at the beginning of the day, when many asthmatics typically experience more symptoms pronounced. Mid-morning, a green therapeutic smoothie combining spinach or kale, rich in magnesium, with a little avocado, healthy fat for absorption of fat-soluble compounds, and some antioxidant red fruits. This snack provides the natural bronchodilator of magnesium during the active morning. Lunch, a Mediterranean meal centered on high-quality proteins such as wild salmon or sardines, rich in omega-3, accompanied by a generous salad containing raw red onion, quercetin, and seasoned with sauce, olive oil, turmeric and black pepper, bioavailable curcumin. This combination provides potent inflammatory modulation during the most active part of the day. Afternoon, an entire apple with shell, quercetin, with a small handful of nuts, complement the anti-inflammatory benefits, providing stabilization. Additional mastocytes during the afternoon when many patients experience symptoms. Dinner, a light meal based on dark green vegetables, magnesium, prepared with onion, quercetin, and finished with anti-inflammatory spices such as and ginger, accompanied by a small portion of fermented foods, like kimchi or sauerkraut. This combination provides continuous support during the night time when pulmonary function naturally decreases. Dr. Fernando Almeida, a specialist in integrative medicine for asthma, he emphasizes what makes this nutritional approach particularly powerful. For the elderly asthmatics, it works through multiple mechanisms, complementary. While conventional treatments often focus only on bronchodilation or general suppression of inflammation, these foods collectively modulate inflammation in a selective manner, stabilize mastocytes, optimize the function of bronchial smooth muscles, reprogramming epigenetically immune cells, dysfunctional, and restore the balance of the intestine axis, lung. It is an approach truly comprehensive that addresses the underlying causes, not just the symptoms. It is essential to understand that this nutritional protocol works better as part of an integrated strategy that includes appropriate use of prescribed conventional medications, foods, complement, do not replace medical treatment, breathing techniques and specific respiratory exercises for asthma, environmental control to reduce exposure to asthmatic triggers, regular physical activity adapted to individual capabilities, effective stress management and relaxation practices, adequate and quality sleep, essential for immunological regulation. Dr. Sofia Mendez, integrative pulmonologist, adds, "We observe results particularly impressive when this nutritional protocol is implemented consistently for at least 3 to 6 months. This is the typical period necessary for that there are significant changes in the intestinal microbiome, epigenetic changes in immune cells, and positive airway remodeling." Patients often report modest improvements in the first weeks, followed by more substantial and sustainable benefits after approximately 3 months of consistent adhesion. For the elderly with specific challenges, as difficulties in preparing food, or budget restrictions, experts recommend prioritizing at least 2 of these, overlooking typically the fermented probiotics and the sources of magnesium, which often provide the most immediate benefits, noticeable for symptomatic control. Conclusion: asthma liberation is possible at any age. When we conclude our exploitation of the 5 transforming overlooking asthma after 60, a deeply hopeful message emerges: the asthma in the seniors need not be a progressively limiting condition that steals quality of life and independence. Contrary to the conventional medical paradigm, who often sees the asthma of the elderly as particularly resistant and recalcitrating, growing scientific evidence demonstrates that with interventions, adequate nutritions, many patients may experience not only improvement, symptomatic, but potential remission even after decades living with this condition. The 5 overlooking we exploited fish rich in omega-3, sources of quercetin like apples and onions, dark green vegetables rich in magnesium, saffron, doTERRA containing curcumin, and probiotic fermented foods are not just generic dietary complements, are specific therapeutic interventions with well-documented action mechanisms that directly address processes, pathophysiologicals that perpetuate the asthma in the aged respiratory system, which makes this approach particularly valuable for people over 60, is that it works harmoniously with the natural systems of the body, without the frequently problematic side effects of anti-somatic medications in high doses. In addition, the benefits extend far beyond the respiratory system, offering cardiovascular protection, cognitive support, immune strengthening and increased general vitality, an especially important holistic consideration for the treatment of elderly patients, as Dr. Claudia Martins, pioneer in nutritional respiratory medicine notes, that we have discovered about nutrition and asthma in the last decade is rewriting our understanding about the potential for aged airway recovery. Elderly patients are not condemned to a descendant spiral of control each more difficult and increasingly intense medication. With nutritional interventions, many experience not only stabilization, but true recovery, functional that allows them to return to activities and pleasures, due to the limits imposed by the asthma. For those who face the challenge of asthma in the elderly, remember, the journey for healthier airways does not require immediate dietary perfection, but consistency and gradual progression. Start by incorporating 1 or 2 of these, overlooking your routine and build from there, observing how your body responds and working in close collaboration with your medical team to monitor results and potentially adjust your medication as appropriate. And perhaps the most important thing, it's never it burns too much to start. Be you newly diagnosed with asthma in maturity or dealing with asthma of difficult control, there are decades, its respiratory system still has a remarkable capacity to respond positively to adequate therapeutic nutrition. Each improvement in pulmonary function, each reduction in the need for rescue medication, and each day lived with easier breathing represents a significant victory for your health and quality of life. The final message is of empowerment and hope. Your lungs, even after decades of chronic inflammation and respiratory challenges, deserve the best support, nutritional possible to recover great function in the years to come. Through these 5 surpluses, you offer not only nutrients, but a real, natural medicine that can help your respiratory system regenerate, strengthen and prosper, allowing you to breathe more freely and enjoy the next phases of your life with renewed vitality. Which of these anti-psycho overstates you plan to incorporate first in your routine? Share your experience or questions in the comments below. Your journey can inspire others to take their first steps towards the release of asthma after 60.